today as we explore. We've prepared an exceptional webinar for you, and feel free as you are joining to introduce yourself in the chat and please share your name, your location. I am in the wonderful, hot Houston, Texas, so let us know who you are, where you are, and just a little about me. My name is Markeisha Watry, and I hope everybody's off to an amazing start. I hope your week is going smoothly. My name is Markeisha Watry, and I am the Professional Learning Services Manager here at Just Right Reader. I'm a former reading teacher, literacy specialist, curriculum designer, and I'm passionate about all things involving literacy. So that's why I'm extremely excited about the today's webinar. And it is being recorded, and you'll get a copy of that recording between 24 and 48 hours after the event. So don't worry if you don't take all the notes. If you do have any questions, you can put them in the chat or the question and answer tab you'll find there. And we have some fabulous colleagues backstage. They'll be answering your questions as well. So if you have burning questions, feel free to put those in the chat. So without further ado, it's great pleasure to introduce Lindsay Kemeny. And she's very inspirational in the world of education. She's an accomplished elementary teacher, a literacy advocate, author, and podcast co host. She does all the things. She has decades of experience, and she is a leading expert in effective reading instruction. She shares her research and strategies through her book and as the co host of a literacy podcast. She is the teacher we all wish we had. So please welcome Lindsay Kemeny.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for spending some of your summer with us today. And I look forward to talking about decodable books. I love decodable books. Thank you for that introduction. I am the author of the book Seven Mighty Moves. And I'm a first grade teacher. So I am a current teacher. And after this webinar today, I'm going to be like full on back to school mode. And I've got to go set up my classroom and figure out what I'll be teaching starting next week. But you can see a little bit about me here. And just, I think the important thing to know is that I love literacy and I love teaching literacy. Sometimes I can be misunderstood, I think, because I'm so passionate and I think teaching a child to read is going to solve all the world's problems. But the reason I'm like that is really because of it really started with my son. And when my son was I knew from the time he was young, he was struggling to learn to read, and he's my third child. So my other ones learned so easily, and I couldn't figure out why what I had been doing with my other children wasn't working with him. And it was really, I was doing all the things I had been taught in college, all the things I'd been taught in my early years of teaching, and nothing was working. And it took him being diagnosed with dyslexia um, in second grade that really started me on my journey, because I had to say, well, what do students with dyslexia need to learn to read? And that led to, what does everyone need to learn to read? What happens in the brain when we learn to read? And it was like this snowball effect. Like it just, and I couldn't get enough. I was reading everything I could get my hands on. I was listening, I was watching. I remember watching these lectures of like hours of these lectures on synthetic phonics. and and the more I learned, the angrier I became, because I was angry I hadn't learned a lot of these things in college or my early years of teaching. And I was angry that some of the things I had been taught had been debunked by research. And we're going to talk about some of those things. And so, I found, and then what really lit a fire under me is that my son was diagnosed with depression at this time too. And I'm not going to go deep into that story, but that just completely changed me as a person, and just really seeing his heartbreak, because his depression all centered around his struggles learning to read. And it was chronic trauma for him and for me over and over. It was night after night of sobbing and terrible things that he said and did. And I was really shocked that I had a 9-year-old son suicidal. Um, and I did all these things to help his depression, to help him. And I took him to therapy and, counseling and everything. But what I found is that what helped him the most was the ability to read, because I saw that as his reading improved, his self-esteem improved. And it was very gradual and it was very, very beautiful to see. And so I just saw firsthand how tightly connected self-esteem and the ability to read are. And this is why I'm so passionate about it, because he's not alone. And I've talked to many others, and I've heard of many other similar experiences. I had lunch with a man who didn't learn to read until he was an adult, and he told me about how he always had a pain in the pit of his stomach. And he said once he learned to read, he said reading took the pain away. And that just hit me. I just thought that is amazing. So I think that the gift of literacy is the greatest gift that we can give our students. And being able to read and write just opens up the windows of opportunity for people. And so I think it's so powerful. And this is why I'm so passionate about it. And we all have a role to play. Whatever our role is in education, whether we are teaching, whether we're coaching the teachers, where we're leading the and administration and helping the teachers, we're all helping the students and we're all helping move this work forward. So thank you for being here. And so if you've heard of my book, so I was making changes. I began working with my son and I was making changes as I worked with him. And then I was applying the things I was learning in my classroom. And so I found that I could categorize the changes I was making into 7 categories. So those represent the 7 moves. And today we're going to be talking about moves 3 and 4, which are really tightly connected, and they both kind of center around using these decodable books for beginning readers in our classrooms. So let's dive right in. We have move 3. I'm going to jump right into this one, which can sometimes be hard for some people to hear. It was hard for me to realize because this is one of those things that I was heavily trained in. I did for years. And then when I found out that there wasn't research to support the 3 queuing system, I was really kind of upset. So it can be hard to hear. So I just want to acknowledge that. But I had to completely abandon something called the 3 queuing system. And if you haven't heard of that, this is this idea that readers use various cues to figure out the words that they are reading. Okay, so it's things like you're using semantics and syntax to figure out the word. The last one looks promising, like, well, wouldn't we want our students to use the graphophonemic information in the word? Yes. And what's funny is I went back in my college textbook and it literally said that that one should be used as a last resort, which is completely wrong. That should be our first resort when we come to reading. Now, if you're not familiar with this term 3 queuing, and um, this doesn't sound familiar, you might be familiar with something called the Beanie Baby strategies. That's what I call them. They are based on 3 queuing. And there is literally no solid research to support the 3 queuing system. So this is things like be like Skippy the Frog, skip over the word, read the rest of the sentence, and then figure out what the word is. Or use your eagle eye, look at the picture. Does it give you a clue? And the child looks at the picture to figure out what the word is. Lips the fish, which is like get your mouth ready, like lips the fish, and no one even knows how that's supposed to help. But if you think about these strategies, these aren't decoding strategies, these are guessing strategies. And when we teach these things, we're actually teaching our students to guess the word. And these just seem to infiltrate curriculum. And it's like I even in when I was teaching, we even had a game as part of our curriculum called Guess the Covered Word. And what you would do is that you would cover a word with a sticky note, and you would have the students guess from the context of the sentence what word might fit there, and then you would show the first letter and then have them guess. And you would never decode that word all the way through. And so, what we know from research is that these are actually strategies that poor readers use and not good readers. Good readers, we know from research, they can read words in isolation. They don't need the context to figure out what the word is. They don't need the picture to figure out what the word is. And so when we teach our students these strategies, we're literally teaching them to read like a poor reader, which is hard to hear. But I saw this with my son because before he had the skills, this is what he would do. He would guess, 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 guess. Once he had the skills he needed, he didn't need to guess. He could use the knowledge he had to decode that word all the way through. And one clarification I want to make, because when I'm saying on this slide, and I say we don't want to use like the context to figure out what the word is, I'm very specific in that we don't use the context to figure out what the word is, but it doesn't mean you never use context. Yes, we use context to understand the meaning of the words. We use context to know if this word is wind or wind. Is the word read or read? Context is going to help us with that. Pictures are going to be wonderful support for our comprehension. So yes, we look and we use books with pictures because they're supporting what's happening, but those are not our go-tos. That's not how we decode and read the words. What we want instead, we don't want this guessing. What we want is we want students to become familiar with the details of the words, because what they need in order to store those words in memory for this automatic, effortless retrieval in the future, they need to connect the sounds they hear with the letters, the spellings they see on the page with the meaning of the word. Those three things have to happen. So you think about when we're relying on these other strategies and we're saying, look at the picture, or excuse me, read the rest of the sentence, figure out what would be in the word. Think about where the student's eyes are going with all of those. They go off the word so fast. And you'll see that when they're reading, as soon as a student, is a little uneasy with the word and they don't know it, that their eyes go off that word so fast. They're looking at the picture for help. They're looking at you. They're looking at the rest of the sentence. But what we need is for them to become familiar with the details of the words. So we want to draw their attention. We want them to decode that word from left to right. Mark Seidenberg said, the best cue to a word is the word itself. And I love that. So we need them to trust the knowledge that we've taught, trust their knowledge of those letters, sounds, those letter combinations, and to keep their eyes on the words. So that is just like one of the first things I have to teach my little first graders when they come into my classroom is like eyes on the words, because I know I want them to make those connections. They can't make those sound symbol connections if they're not looking at the word, right? All right. So then, what do you do? What do you do when a child comes to a word they don't know? And I use these 3 decoding prompts. This is what I use when a child comes to a word they don't know. Then, first, I'm just going to point. And I love to, when I'm working with a child, I like to point. I'll kind of track with my finger or a pencil. I prefer a pencil. Track above the words while they are tracking under with their finger. And I like to use a pencil because I can point to not only the word if they missed it, but the little part in the word that they missed. It's usually the vowel sound, right? So I'll point to that and they will, and that's the first thing I do is just point, because sometimes a child will self-correct once you draw their attention to it. Now, let's say they don't, or they don't even know the spelling in the word. So we're going to say like there's the word found, right? And it's usually the vowel sound that they struggle with. And so I'm going to point to the OU, and let's say they don't remember OU or they haven't been taught it yet, but it's in the book that we're reading. So I'm going to give them a verbal prompt. I'll say, OU spells ow. What sound? And I'll have them repeat ow. And then we go to the blending prompt, and I'm going to have them blend the sounds. So I'm going to, because the F, the N, the D, those are all very regular. So the only part the child needs help with is that OU. And then I have them go through the work of blending it. Because I'm not going to just tell them the whole word, because then I'm doing the work. And I want them to do the work. And I know that they need to solidify the sounds they hear, the letters they see, with the meaning of the word. That's going to help that word get into their long-term memory. So I allow them that process to go back and blend. So I'll say ow, and then they can blend found, found. And then we can keep reading. So I hope you can hear. I have a little video clip, and I'm going to play of a student I was tutoring last summer, and you can just see this. You can just see this process. I give her a little bit more wait time because I know I had taught her the spelling. I'm trying to think what it is. I think it might be AI in this book. I give a little more wait time because I know I had taught it to her, and I like that productive struggle of her trying to recall that from memory. It's just going to help her as she kind of struggles to retrieve that and remember and bring it to the forefront of her mind. It's going to help that be quicker in the future. Okay, so here it is. If you cannot hear the video, just put it in the chat. Just let me know, because we'll just go on if we can't hear it.
Yes, Abby. With what? Remember AI? We learned this last week. What's AI spell? First, just tell me AI. Do you remember what AI spells? A. Yeah, good. Wait. Nice. Here. Oh, my turn. Yes, Abby. Wait here. Yes, Abby. Wait here.
Okay, so you can see she just needed, and she kept trying to blend that, right? She kept trying to, and we needed to isolate that sound for a minute, isolate that AI, and then she was able to read it just fine. So, that is something to practice. Like if we were in person, I might say, let's practice this with a partner and take a word where, it's like I said, it's usually the vowel sound the students are going to struggle with, where you can just practice giving those prompts to students. But we're going to move on. So that was just a quick, brief overview of what Move 3 entails. And Move 4 this moves us right into Move 4, because Move 4 is to use decodable text instead of predictable text for beginning readers. So this is one of the first, like my first little inklings that something wasn't right with some of the things I had been taught about teaching reading, because it was even before my son was diagnosed with dyslexia, it was the same year he was diagnosed was the same year that it was my first year teaching kindergarten. And in kindergarten, you spend all this time teaching letter names and sounds. And I was so excited to then bring my students to my small group table and say, now I'm going to show you how you can read words. Now that you know these sounds, we're going to be able to read. But the books that I had provided through our big box curriculum were these predictable, repetitive texts. So it was things like, we cleaned up the garage, we cleaned up the kitchen, we cleaned up the bedroom. And these books, were filled with sound spelling correspondences I had not taught. Like think of the word cleaned. I haven't taught EA spells E. I haven't taught my kindergartners the ED suffix and that there's 3 different sounds that can represent. And so the only way for students to read those kind of books is to use the 3 cueing system. These books were practically written for that purpose. So they would have to memorize the pattern, they would have to look at the picture, and to guess. And so I remember giving them the book, and then I'd have to say, "Oh wait, oh stop, oh no, oh you can't sound this one out. Look at the picture. Does it give you a clue?" And I was like, that just did not sit well with me. And I had I had said that so many times when I taught second grade, and I didn't think anything of it. And that had just been, it had been like drilled in me, my early years of teaching and in college. Like, yes, that's what good readers do, when in fact they don't. And so this was the first time that I was like, I'm giving these brand new, fragile readers the wrong idea of what reading is. So this quote, I really like this quote. The types of words that appear in beginning reading texts may well exert a more powerful influence in shaping children's word identification strategies than the method of reading instruction. We can spend all this time with a beautiful explicit phonics lesson. But then if we go back in our small group or whenever else, and we give them books, predictable, repetitive books for our beginning readers, then it's like those are two competing ideas. So they can't use their phonics knowledge. And that's what I want. I want them to solidify those sound symbol correspondences. But instead, I give them predictable books, and then they're learning something completely different. They're learning to guess instead of learning that knowledge. And so that has a big effect on those students. So let's just look at this. I just want to show you. Let's pretend like you are my students, and I have taught you that, this little kind of diamond is a, and that triangle is and that circle is s, and that dot is t. Okay. I have taught you those. Now, what does this say beneath it? And you can put it in the chat. So just take a minute. And what does that say? So that says Sam sat. And you can do that. You could do that because I taught you that. That might have taken you a minute, and it might have been, but you could see how once you had become like more automatic with those sound symbol correspondences, you could read that quicker. But let's say that I had still just taught you those 4 symbols, and I gave you text that looks like this. What does that say? You have no idea. It seems a little ridiculous when you think about it, right? This says, I saw Sam at the store. He was buying candy. And the idea is you would say, I saw Sam at the store. He was buying candy. Turn the page. I saw Sam at the store. He was buying milk. Turn the page. I saw Sam at the store. He was buying bread. And the students would know what it said by looking at the picture and by memorizing that pattern. I mean, it really seems ridiculous. We don't do this in math. We don't teach our students single digit addition and then give them a worksheet with multiplication problems on it. So why do we do this in reading? This is a sample of one of those predictable repetitive texts. And it's frustrating because, you go to the library and the public library, and you want to get a book for your brand new reader, and they're all these predictable repetitive texts. So what ideas are these texts reinforcing? What are students learning when they're reading these texts? They're learning to memorize patterns, and they're learning to guess from context. But what we need is for them to solidify those sounds symbol correspondences, right? And let me tell you, as a kindergarten teacher, it is so much, and as a previous kindergarten, now I'm first grade, it is so much easier to listen to a kindergartner read a predictable repetitive text because they sound like they're fluent readers already. You're like, yes, this is so easy. Turn the page, read this, and keep going. Versus when you give them a decodable book and they are sounding out at the beginning, and you hear them going sat, sat. On the next page, it's the same. The word is there again. Sat, sat. And it's like, oh my gosh, like every page there's this like slow decoding at first, but that is exactly what has to happen. We go slow to go fast. It's this productive struggle that we cannot skip that productive struggle. And it can be tempting because it's easier to listen to them, read those repetitive texts. But what happens when the text gets too hard? What happens when there's no pictures? What happens when they can't guess from context? So sometimes it's not the first or second grade teacher that can see there's a problem because they don't realize they're just memorizing and guessing from context. It's the second, third, fourth grade teacher that suddenly realizes this child can't read. And the thing is that some students can crack the code themselves. But many more cannot. So the majority of those students, it's really going to be damaging for them to pick up those bad habits of 3Qing. Okay, so why use decodables? I love this research article. If you're looking for a great research article that kind of sums up everything in quote science term. It's called Doing the Reward. How big of a nerd I am because I love this research study. In fact, my podcast Literacy Talks, we did like a 3-part series where we just dove in and talked about this article, Ending the Reading Wars. Anyway, they said that phonics is more effective when children are given immediate opportunities to apply what they have learned to their reading. Okay, that's what decodables do. They give me that purposeful practice where they can apply what I just taught them. I want them to apply what I just taught them in phonics. And I love, if you don't know who Dr. Pam Kastner is, she is amazing. She is the literacy lead in Pennsylvania. And she said, if it's been taught but not mastered, there is probably a practice gap. And when she said that, I was just like, yes. And I think that is so common that we don't give our students enough practice. And that is why I love using decodables, because that is helping them practice, apply their phonics information. Okay, so what are decodables? Most of the words in the decodable book can be sounded out based on the phonics skills you have taught them. Um, they usually will follow, there's usually one focus, like phonics concept focus in the book, but sometimes there's some that are just a review, and I like those too. Like, especially as a kindergarten teacher, I loved having lots of books on that CBC level because they just needed so much practice to get those automatic. The books need to follow a scope and sequence. So when I first remember, I told you I was teaching kindergarten, and it was my first year, and I was frustrated because we had these predictable repetitive texts. So I first just went to TPT and downloaded some decodables, and there was like no scope and sequence. So it was just like whatever the author thought would be decodable was in there. It was really kind of a mess. And I just learned very quickly that just because it says decodable doesn't mean it is, or it doesn't mean that the author understands the purpose of decodable texts and what they really are. So you just need to watch to make sure that you're getting some high quality decodable texts where the creators understand the purpose. And then they allow readers to apply what they've learned from your phonics lessons. It's you can think of decodability on a continuum, because what's decodable for one student might not be decodable for another. So, someone might see a decodable that has a consonant E, like a lot of a consonant E words with a, and they say that's decodable. But it's not decodable for a kindergartner who hasn't been taught that yet. It is decodable once their teacher has taught them that vowel consonant E pattern, then that book is decodable. Okay. So you want to think of it as a continuum, and you really want to consider the reader, what the reader knows and what the reader has been taught before you just give them any decodable book. So let's look at a couple Um, and I'm using pictures from some Just Right Reader decodables, which I love, and I use them in my classroom. And so let's look at some of these. And can you see what you see the text here? What do you think the skill focus is? I'm going to ask that first. What do you think the focus of this text is? What do you think the skill, like what phonics skill is the focus? If you read those, you're going to see the same sound spelling over and over. What is it? So if you are thinking, yes, yep, it is the short I. So you can see, because look at how many words are on this page. Look how many have that short I sound. We have it, rips, tips, will, Tim, and quit. We've got 6 words out of those. That is a lot. They're going to get a lot of practice with the short I. Yes, good. I see it coming through the chat now. What else do they need to know to read this text? What else do they need to know? As you're looking at it, I'm looking at it. It's basically your basic alphabet sounds, right? We need the T, we need R, we need P, we need S. It's all those just your basic alphabet. Q U, we have there. That's going to be a little bit hard. We do have the double L. So that if they haven't taught that yet in your scope and sequence, I think the double L like that's very easy, right? Because they know not to go oh. They pick that up very quickly. The one word that you might have to point out and help them with really is no, because that O has the open, has the long sound for the, it's an open syllable, has a long sound, and your students might have only been taught ah for O at this point when you're using this text. So that's something you're going to want to point out to them. So that might be considered a tricky word at first until they have been taught that. And you're going to for sure have some tricky or irregular words in your text. You can't get away with that, or else they're going to sound really weird. So and that is one of my moves. I'm not talking about irregular text or irregular words today, but that is something that you just know that you will want to teach those, pre-teach those before they read the book. Okay, here's another one. Can you tell what the concept is, the focus of this book? Yep, this one is digraph SH. So you can see we have the word wish, we have ship, we have shell. So wonderful. They're getting a lot of practice with that SH. What are some maybe irregular words that you're going to want to pre-teach? The word said is going to be, yep, Katie, you put it right when I said it. The word said is a regular word that you're going to want to just pull out and teach them before they read the book. Also, the word or a, that if you have not taught that, if you've taught that, great. If not, that's something that you're going to want to talk about, because most very beginning readers have learned for a, right? And of course, the word I might be another one that you want to make sure that they know. Okay, we're going to getting a little harder now. We're getting farther along in a scope and sequence, so you're going to see some, a little bit longer passages with a little bit harder words, which is really great. Can you tell what the focus is here? What is the phonics focus? The focus here is that A consonant E, right? That A consonant E, and now the A is going to be long. Instead of that A sound, we have A, because we have the word flames, we have skates, we have cupcake. And you can see okay, what other skills? And I'm just going to quickly go through this because I want to make sure we have time for everything I want to share today. But some other things, like you see we have the word pink. So that very likely in this scope and sequence, the ink, the NK and G has already been taught. But if you are using this book and you have a different scope and sequence and you haven't taught that INK ink, then that is something that you're going to want to pull out to teach, or wait and use this book until after you have taught that. And we'll talk about that later, a little bit later, because there's different scope and sequences. So you always have to consider how the books you're using align with yours. And another, like a irregular or tricky word for students here might be out, because they probably haven't been taught the OU ow at this point in the sequence. So that's something that you're going to work with them on. Also, her would be a word I would pre-teach. Okay, so in my book, I share some components of a phonics lesson, explicit phonics lesson. They don't have to be in this order, but I just share some of them. And one of those things is to read decodable text. I do like to do that as part of my whole group phonics lesson. And I have a whole group decodable text routine that I share. But I think what I'm going to do, looking at time, is I'm just going to go ahead and go right into how I use this in small group, because in small group is also when that's my favorite time to use decodables, because that's when I can really listen to students, give them individualized immediate feedback, and I really get to know them as readers. And so I will just share my small group decodable text routine. And I think of it as like what I do before reading, what I do during reading, and what I do after reading. And if I am short on time, well, regardless, I want to say that I spend the majority of my time in small group right here, having students read the text. Because everything else I could do in whole group, what I can't do in whole group so easily is listen to every child read the decodable text and give them feedback. So that's what I like to focus on. That's where the bulk of our small group time is spent, where they're just reading. So let me just go over kind of what it looks like when I'm working with students in the small group. So before we read the text, we're going to review that target skill that I want them to learn. And so we're going to read and write words with that target skill. So like in this book, like this would be prepping a book on CH, spelling ch. And so I'm going to have some words written up on my little whiteboard that I have at my small group table. We're going to practice reading those. If we have time, we're going to spell a few of those words. And this is all just to help prime them to read. And then, so this is another way I'll make little word lists that we will read to practice that skill. And I'm going to pre-teach or review any of those irregular high frequency words. So remember, I was just showing you those books and just saying, oh, pull out, this is something I know I would need to pull out. This one, those are ones that I would teach here and I would pre-teach. Now, they might have already been taught them and I just need to review them because those irregular words are a little bit harder and take a little more time for students to remember. Or I might just have to be teaching them the first time. And I have a whole routine that I do share in Seven Mighty Moves for how I teach those. And I might do that whole routine, or I might do quick, like here I might say, look, this is the word they. What are the sounds? And my students go, th, a. And I'll say, yeah, look at this word. What two letters are spelling the sound a? Yeah, the EY are spelling A. What's the word? And they say they. Yeah, this word's a little tricky. We'll have to remember that one. They. You're going to see that in your story. And then I'll do it again. Hey, and this word, the O, is going to spell the oo sound. Let's sound out this word. D-oo. Do. Yeah, that can be a little hard to remember. So what's the word? Do. And I'm just going to pre-teach those irregular words. So what I love, so all of that stuff that we can do before we read, you can use the words right from the decodable text. And what I love about the Just Right readers is that that's all in there for me. So I don't even have to flip through the pages to find what words that are going to be hard. I can look in the back and it's telling me the target phonics skill. So, okay, I have that. I have some decodable words right there. So I could write those up on my little whiteboard, or I could choose a couple of those to have students spell. And then the high frequency words are right there too. So I know, okay, here's I got to do go and you. Those are the irregular ones. So those are the ones I'm going to teach. So it's just nice because it's one less thing I really have to do. It's so easy to plan. I could just flip to this page and then I can do that before reading those a few things that I just showed you, and it's all right there for me. Okay, then during reading, my favorite part is just having them read, and I get to listen because that's the goal. I want them to practice with feedback. So there's a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of different ways you could structure the small group time, and I'm going to just share what I prefer and why. Because some people have everyone take a turn in the small group. Some people have them all read together. Some people have them partner read in the small group. What I like to do is have everyone reading at the same time out loud, but at different places in the text. That sounds chaotic, but it's really not. So if I have 5 students at my table, I'll give books to students in spots 1, 3, and 5. And then they go ahead and they start reading out loud, just kind of whisper reading, not super loud, but not quiet so I can hear them. And then I will give those word lists that you saw in a picture a couple slides ago. I will give those word lists to the students in spots 2 and 4 so that they're not just sitting there, but they are doing something while I'm waiting for the other students to turn the page. When the other students are on the next page, then I'm going to give the books to students in spots 2 and 4, and they'll start reading at the beginning. So now everyone is reading out loud. But they're at different places. So they're not just listening and copying their neighbor. They're at their own spot in the text. Yes. And then I'm like leaning in and listening. I listen and work with this student and then this one and then this one. And you get really good at listening to this one and then hearing something over here and being like, oh, check that again. And then coming back over here. You get really good at it. And so here's just a very quick, like 20-second video clip of some students, and you can see that it's not so chaotic. Everyone's just focused on what they're reading in the text. So hopefully that shows you it's really not chaotic. And I had someone say, well, wonder if students have problems with attention. Of course it's interesting because of course I've had students with attention difficulties. I've never had anyone struggle with this. If you did, especially once it's just become a habit and they understand what we're doing, if you did, an idea would be to use like a little PVC pipe so that they are just really listening, to what they're saying. Okay, I already mentioned that I really try to make sure they keep their eyes on the words. So sometimes students will even if they look up at me and finish the sentence, which usually you can't do in a decodable book. Sometimes you can. But even if they do that and they have said the words right, I'm like, now look at the word while you say it. And I draw their attention back down to the word because I know they've got to connect the sound with they hear with the symbols they see, those letters, and the meaning of the word. I know those 3 things have to happen. That's a process that happens in the brain called orthographic mapping. I know that has to happen. It can't happen if they're not looking at the words. Okay, and then something I might do with a student is what I call read, model, read again. And so what we'll do is they will read the little part, the page first. So they read it first. And then I'll say, now listen to me while I read it. And I go back and now I model that same part of the text. And so now I'm going to model appropriate phrasing and the rate and expression. And then I have them go and they read it again. So it's kind of like 3 reads. They read it twice. So they read it first, then I model it, the same part, and then they go back and read the same part again. And I love this because first they get that productive struggle of sounding out those words, becoming familiar with those details of the words, right? And then they listen to me and then they read it again, which is just so great for their confidence because they realized how much better they read it. They read it the second time. So they're like, wow. And I love that they're getting another pass at those words, another practice opportunity. So it's great. So here's a little video clip of me doing this with a student. And you can even hear that when she reads it, she kind of mimics. When she reads it the second time, you'll hear her kind of mimic the way that I read it, the expression.
But it is had are hard from him to for him to read. It is hard for him to write. Good, listen to me. But it is hard for him to read. It is hard for him to write. But it is hard for him to read. It is hard for him to write.
So you could kind of hear that as she gets the expression. So I love doing that. I just call it read, model, read again. Another thing I like to do with students is this fancy term called the neurological impress method, which just means to read at the same time as the student. And this strategy is really great for a student who's already pretty accurate, but just is reading really kind of like word by word and kind of slowly. And what you do is you just read a little bit quicker than how they normally read. And so it just kind of, moves them forward a little bit because they have to work a little bit to keep up with you. Not too much, just a little bit. So here's a video doing that with a student.
This time, we're going to read together. Try to keep your voice with mine. Then what can rabbits do? Once rabbits see a fox, they run. Go, rabbit, go.
Okay, I'll stop right there. So all those things can be done with any kind of text. And so I'll have students that are using decodable text, but they're at different levels kind of, because some are just really sounding out, right? And we're just building the automaticity. And then some are starting to really get that. They don't have to sound out anymore. They can blend in their head and just say the word. And we're working a little bit more on that. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. We're working a little bit more on that fluency. So just remember, the best cue to a word is the word itself. We talked about this already. And so when students are coming to having trouble with a word, then I'm going through these decoding prompts with them. And then after reading, the final step after reading, because I told you before, I've told you about during, and then after they read the decodable text, I'm going to ask questions about the text, or I'm going to have students retell the text. Because we always want to bring it back to meaning. And this is, the decodable texts are not necessarily like where we're going to have our rich conversations, right? That's going to be later when I'm using other texts to kind of focus on our vocabulary comprehension. But I always still want to attend to meaning and make sure students are paying attention to what they're reading. And so we will talk about the text afterwards. And then it's important to remember that decodable texts are like training wheels. Kids only need them for a short amount of time, and the goal is to transition away from them as soon as the child is ready. So I get a little bit worried because sometimes in this, like, we're learning the science of reading and we have a tendency to overcorrect. And we don't want to overcorrect. It doesn't mean that now, we only use decodables. No, we use decodables to help students with their decoding. We're still reading aloud and using rich texts at other parts of the day. And then as students are ready, we're transitioning them into regular texts. They're not going to just read decodables until third or fourth grade, right? We're going to move them away from them. And sometimes I don't think we think about enough how we transition. And the tricky thing is that not all students are ready to transition at the same time. And there's not like a cut and dry point. So some people, and I share some of these recommendations in my book, some people kind of say, well, they need to have been taught, of course, your alphabet, your digraphs, your vowel consonant E, your vowel teams, your diphthongs, oi and ow, and your R controlled. And once students are able to do those, then you start transitioning. But some students are ready a little earlier, and some are ready, need more time in decodables. I find that a lot of my students are ready to start transitioning the middle of first grade, some not until closer to the end of first grade, but that doesn't mean that there isn't still use for the decodables, because still, when I'm teaching a phonics concept, I like them to have practice in the decodable to really internalize and get automatic with that concept. But then I'm also introducing and having them read other texts. Like my first graders were reading Click Clack Moo at the end of the year, or Frog and Toad, and some of that beautiful literature. So you really want to consider the percentage of decodable words in the text. And I like to start the year with students in highly decodable texts. And as they're ready, scaffold them into regular text by giving them books with that are a little less decodable, a little bit harder, and then into regular texts. If I put them in a regular text too soon, what happens is they start guessing, and they start learning to guess and pick up bad habits. And when I see that, I know that I need to put them back in a decodable. So you can see like this one from Just Right Reader, very decodable. Fill it up, sip it. Every single word is completely decodable. Now, look how, if you look at some of the books as we go on, they get harder. There's more text, and you're going to see more irregular words. That's great. I want that, because that's going to help scaffold students. So, I want them to have experienced some of those more challenging spellings. Like, look at the name on this bottom one. You can see that this is definitely further along in the phonics scope and sequence because it's harder. But look how we have the name Xander. And so they're learning to be flexible with some of the sound spellings, because that X is spelling Z there, right? And we have the ER. Actually, I think the focus of this book might be ER. I can't remember. But you can see how we're getting more difficult, and we're getting more difficult spellings and some more irregular words. That's wonderful, because that's going to help scaffold them into regular texts. And when I divide my students up, I was talking about small group. I have different groups with different purposes. So I might have students who really have still not solidified the alphabet letter sounds and names. So that might be the focus of our group. And then we're just using a very beginning decodable books. Like maybe it only has MASPT, those 5 letters, and we are sounding out words in the book with that. That's also another thing I like about Just Right Readers is they have a lot that are, they have so many books, but they have a lot also at this simple, like one word on the page, which is great for the students in this group. I have the decoding skills. They're full on in decodable books, and they're following a scope and sequence. I have some that have a fluency focus in their groups, and they might be in decodables and working on like that automaticity and fluency in the decodables. They might be transitioning. And they might be in regular text. And same with groups that I have, like, hey, they are fluent readers. And so they are in just regular authentic books, and our focus is on content knowledge and building vocabulary. Okay. So I want to get time to your questions. We're almost done. I mentioned this. If students have a strong guessing habit, they need more time in the decodable. I want them to learn to trust the letters and trust their phonics knowledge. So I'm always just really listening to my students and how they're reading, especially when I start to transition them. I'm really listening carefully. If they resort to a lot of guessing, I put them back in the decodable. And there's a lot of things to look for in a decodable series. And one thing you want to check is how it aligns to your phonics scope and sequence. It's not going to be perfect, but you can still make them work. Like I have a lot of different decodables in my classroom, and I can make them work because I can look and I can say, Okay, I want to use this, but it has already included ER, and I haven't taught that. So I'm going to wait and use this book in a couple weeks after I've taught that to my students. Okay. Or maybe you're just like, oh, I can just pull that out because it only had one word with ing and I haven't taught that. I'll just pull that out and pre-teach it, and then we can read the book. So you just want to consider that. You want to make sure that, it's okay, of course, for the books to have irregular words. You don't want them all irregular words, especially at the beginning. So you want to consider that they're limited at first and then they gradually put more in. And like there are some terrible decodable books out there. I will admit I have seen some, but there are so many other good ones. It's really exciting. And so that's why I was really excited to get Just Right Reader in my classroom, because I really like these books. And something unique about them is they have a QR code and with the lesson. So like with the phonics lesson. So this book is on SH. There's a phonics lesson on SH in Spanish and in English. So how cool if you have a lot of English learners in your classroom, how neat would it be to get in this cycle of having them listen to the phonics lesson in Spanish before they get it in whole group in English? I just think that would be amazing. All right. Okay. And I'm done. So I'm so sorry I went a little bit over, but we'll see if there's time for any questions. And if not, you can feel free to reach out to me. I'm on social media here, and I have a contact form on my website too if you want to